Back in 2021, I played and beat Dark Souls 3, and surprised myself not just by staying with it to beat the game, but also by the fact that I kinda liked it. I genuinely expected to develop some heart problems from yelling and cursing out at the game, but as each play session went on, that proved not to be the case. I spent some time over the past few years debating if I should start another FromSoft game, and which one it should be, and after procrastinating this long enough that Elden Ring and its DLC were no longer really fresh, I decided it was time to go ahead and play Elden Ring, which snowballed into me playing Dark Souls 1. With the final push from a few of my friends that wanted to either suffer with me or see me suffer, I decided to jump back into FromSoft's playground and stick with my journey to the end. And now that I'm done with both games, I just want to talk a little bit about both of these journeys and how they stack up against each other from an older age of FromSoft games to the newest one. Now before we get too into it, I'm not really much of a story guy in games. My brain is wired so that if game fun, why need story? Focusing on story takes too much time when I could just bonk baddies and find cool stuff on the ground. And that's especially true for me with Souls games. Look, if I want to know what the story is, I'll watch the Lord YouTubers because they'll explain it better to my goopy ADHD riddled brain. I will say Dark Souls 1 intro cinematic was way easier to follow and sent me up with more knowledge for where the game was headed, but that could just be because it was my third From game, so I knew a little bit more about how the story's presented, but I think it's probably just due to the fact that I could associate names with the enemies as opposed to just seeing a bunch of pictures of demigods. I also don't want to get too into quest lines for NPCs in both games. I didn't do a ton of them in Elden Ring, and I had a hacker destroy my save file low key, so I had like a quarter of the NPCs my first playthrough and had a New Game Plus to experience some of them. What I have seen though has been fantastic in both games, and I'll forever remember characters like Blyde, Alexander, Solaire, Onion Knight, Quaylana, and the only NPC that is genuinely on site for me with in Fat Farquaad. Now the main difference between Elden Ring and Dark Souls, besides graphics and an overall more polished feel, is the open world. I normally hate open world games. I think only a handful of open world games actually have a world that feels like it's worth exploring and not just some empty wasteland that's meant to pad out playtime. Elden Ring joined that list of games where the open world kept me interested. Plus, the option to say, man, this boss is kinda hard. Let me go explore and come back in a little bit when I'm stronger, is honestly a great idea, especially for newer players. And people who aren't too stubborn to admit, hey, I'm outmatched here, unlike this idiot right here. Don't get me wrong, I love finding new dungeons, seeing that one field boss I've beaten for the 4th time, and just finding cool loot in general as I went between the main story areas. But I didn't really feel like I knew the world at all, and it kinda took me out of it a little bit. This greatly differed from my experience in Dark Souls 1, where I felt like if you dropped me anywhere, and I mean anywhere in the world, that could let me walk back to Firelink Shrine, I'd be able to walk back to Firelink Shrine. The world of Dark Souls felt like everything was connected and that every turn there might be a new area for me to explore or a boss waiting to kick my ass. I felt invited to go out and check every possible path. Part of this is just how shortcuts and bonfires are set up in Dark Souls, as exploring every possible nook and cranny could very well lead to a much needed shortcut back to or a brand new bonfire. I did still feel invited to explore the individual levels of Elden Ring, but it felt like after I was done, I had to just kind of pack up, get on my horse, and go to the next destination instead of adventure being literally at my doorstep. With that said, I, much like Zoro from One Piece, tend to get lost a lot. But it was way easier to look for the one thing I needed in the smaller confined space of Dark Souls as opposed to the massive world of Elden Ring. Case in point, I got smashed by the dragon outside of Raya Lucaria and didn't notice that it was guarding the key to Raya Lucaria, so I thought, oh, maybe I should go somewhere else, maybe I'm just missing something here. And that resulted in me taking a trip to Caelid, where I then had to Google what I was supposed to do after wasting a few hours and getting my ass handed to me. This differed from when I started Dark Souls 1 because I got lost almost right away deep in the catacombs, and after getting a bonfire, I went, maybe this isn't the way. Now I know what you might be thinking, yeah, that's definitely not the way, idiot. This new skeletons do way too much damage. But we all know the Welcome to Dark Souls comic where Link sees a skeleton as the first enemy and gets his ass handed to him, so I was like, oh yeah, that's just the game. That's got to be the way. The comics got to be right. It felt easier for me to say, let me go back, since I hadn't invested as much time and as much distance into my graveyard thievery, as opposed to the cross-continental trek that was going to Caitlyn. And honestly, I do get why some older Souls players say they dislike Elden Ring, even though it's a more polished version and has some really fun and challenging bosses. Dark Souls invited me to look around and see what was happening, as opposed to Elden Ring, which invited me to, for better or worse, get lost looking at everything around me, which would ultimately lead to me getting sucked into the world and looking at everything around me, but it often led to me not making much progress at all. One thing that Elden Ring does better for sure than Dark Souls 1 is allowing you to reallocate stats so you can mess around with new builds. Dark Souls 1's lack of a mechanic to reallocate stats basically said, hey, if you want to make a significant change, you better start over or get to grind in 30 levels and dump that into whatever stat you wanted to make that new build work. It really felt like the one guy that says, oh yeah, I'll get my life on track, I'll go to the gym for New Year's, and then they quit a week after. Versus Elden Ring, who felt like the much more stable adult that would say, hey, I want to change. Let me just do it right now. Elden Ring also in general just had a stupid amount of combos to mess around with. I mean, when you have all the Ashes of War for your weapons, the larger pool of spells, incantations, the dragon communions, there's just a lot of stuff to play around with, and you need to allocate a lot of stats around if you want to try new things. I'm not really what you'd call a build crafter unless you count putting most of my stats into strength, stamina, and health, and then using a massive stick to bonk things. I am a massive creature of habit, so I just found what worked for me and didn't really want to change it unless something really cool and shiny came along. Even though I did mess around a bit with incantations in Elden Ring and pyromancy in Dark Souls 1, I feel like this is just an aspect of the Souls games I haven't really tapped into, and I really look forward to it in the future because some of these spells seem sick. Another very immediate change that you can kind of see over the 12 years is the pace of combat. Dark Souls really feels like you're playing chess, plotting each move, waiting for your chance to strike, while Elden Ring feels more so like chess if it was directed by Michael Bay and they injected you with enough caffeine to wake up a sloth. There's still great meaning behind each action from enemies, but they can't sit still like a kid who just got the ability to run, and they have enough added explosive attacks to trigger the war flashbacks. The best example of this I can think of is by looking in Night Rain, actually, where even those nothing burger bosses from Elden Ring that are in Night Rain are significantly faster than the slow boys such as the Gaping Dragon, Centipede Demon, and even Freya from Dark Souls 2. While every boss, even the pushovers in Elden Ring, seem to be going for gold in the Olympics, the early Dark Souls reps feel like an average, out-of-shape person, like me, seeing them go and saying, I could probably do that, before passing out after 3 steps. Elden Ring's faster combat pace does feel like a natural evolution of Souls games to me, as the faster pace and more cinematic view of the boss fights is really where we're going in the gaming industry, and we're leaving away these slower paced combat designs from back in 2011. I will say that it is also really interesting to see the kind of prototype for modern Souls bosses in guys like Artorias and Manus. While the overall pace and the constant bombardment of moves are really fun to get the hang of and led to some amazing and memorable boss fights, even when the bosses weren't crazy hard like Ancestral Deer and Dancing Lion, a lot of Dark Souls bosses really stood out to me more than the Elden Ring bosses. Now don't get me wrong, from an attack perspective, the Elden Ring bosses are significantly more memorable and challenging than the 4 move having Andes that is most of Dark Souls roster. I just think maybe it's the presentation, because something like Ornstein and Smo is way more memorable than their store brand feeling counterparts in Elden Ring. Maybe it's partly due to the fact that the bosses in Dark Souls all felt really unique to their area, and that the environment that they're in is their unique domain. I mean, let's be realistic, we reused 2 arenas in the capital for like 4 story boss fights in Elden Ring. Plus, think about it. In Elden Ring, there's like 3 total arenas. There's the straight path rectangles that you can see with like Godric and the first boss. You had the big boxes that were mostly seen in dungeons, which I get why there's not a lot of variety. They're dungeon bosses, they're not really that important. And then there's most of the time for the major story bosses, which is just big circle without much in the arena. The most iconic bosses in my opinion, and the ones that really challenged me the most, fit into that final arena. I mean, think about it. You have Radon, Malenia, Mesmer, Rolana, Bale, Godfrey, Rykard, and more. It just felt like the arena existed because we need a big place to fight them where everyone can move around a lot. Compare this to the more unique and oftentimes kind of gimmicky arenas in Dark Souls 1. You got things like the Bridge of the Taurus Demon, the slippery roofs of the Gargoyles, the New York apartment the Capra Demon and his pets rent, and even the Golem's barely big enough arena in Sense Fortress. All feel very unique. And then when you finally do get to the bigger bosses, like Ornstein and Smo, Sif, Nito, the Four Kings, and Gwyn, that have these more open arenas, they still feel more unique because we haven't been using them for the last 50 hours. Even for as bad as the Bed of Chaos and all of Lost Izalith for that matter was, I can still see the unique vision that they were trying to give for each fight. Was the execution of stand in this specific corner in a lava-filled room or jank the platforming section done well? No. And it ended up being, in all honesty, more annoying than anything, especially for the Bed of Chaos. But just knowing that it wasn't another god with a crazy fast moveset that can hit basically the entire arena makes it stand out. And I honestly hope FromSoft tries another platforming style boss because I can see the vision, man. And I feel like with the experience they have now, they can make something truly memorable. One final note on bosses. I feel like most of Dark Souls 1's bosses are very possible the first try, because you have the bigger telegraphs, slightly slower moves, slightly more reaction time. Whereas Elden Ring, you really need to take the time and graduate from each boss's specific university after going to crippling debt to learn their moves. Is it still fun? Yes, but it's just a different approach. Overall, I thought both these games were masterpieces, and it made me really want to keep pushing myself to go through every FromSoft Souls game. Like, if you told me after I played Dark Souls 3 in 2021 that I would one day be looking forward to trying Dark Souls 2, I would have wondered who kidnapped me and what kind of dirt they had on me. If you guys watch it here, thank you so much. And since you guys are probably already fans of FromSoft games, let me know what got you guys into the series. I'm not going to give a spiel, you know, YouTuber crap. Take care. Bye-bye.